we have arrived in the Triduum tonight with the Mass of the Last Supper, ending Lent, beginning the 3 days that are so powerful in our liturgical year, the Triduum. And you don't have to go to church. You get to go to church, and it's very important to go to church and to experience this, because these 3 days can definitely be life changing, absolutely life changing, if you apply yourself and really put yourself in the scenes of the Last Supper, and the crucifixion, and the resurrection eventually. Okay, every scene has an important place for you. Now, tonight, the Garden of Gethsemane. Always remember that. Adam, please begin.
Mm. Yeah, so as you mentioned before we started, to remind everybody that this is one continuous liturgy, starting with the Mass at the Last Supper through Easter. So though we don't have to go to Mass today, really this is the beginning of the liturgy that culminates on Easter Sunday.
Mhm.
So would it be nice to be with Christ and participate in the whole thing? Yeah, absolutely. We don't have to, but it would be really nice. And even if you're not going to make it to Mass, as you said, like, try to enter into the story. Maybe
Right.
take the time to read the story of the Last Supper,
Mhm.
the arrest, the garden, um, because at least, like, as we talked about yesterday, we're choosing the path of Jesus and the path of obedience to the Father, and Judas chose the path of isolation and sin. And if, as we choose to walk with Jesus this week, and now that we're in the Triduum, we want to walk with him the whole time. And really that walk, the Passion walk, starts after the Last Supper. And the Last Supper is such a powerful thing because that's where we get the words of consecration from, right? So those words that if you've been at Mass and noticed the priest very carefully and usually enunciating very clearly, and they tend to read, they may have done it 1,000 times, but the exact words that Jesus said at the Last Supper for the consecration, they make absolutely sure they're saying the words that Christ said perfectly, because it's so critical. So, and we've talked about this before, the gift of the Eucharist, the promise that Jesus made to abide with his church until his return. And this is the way he abides with the church, which is in the Eucharist. Of course, in spirit, he's everywhere. It's his mystical body, but he abides with us in a particular way in the Eucharist. So the Last Supper is a big deal. It's worth meditating on, even if you don't make it to Mass. But Deb, the thing where, for me, like, I immediately emotionally, like, kind of, I don't know, I get heavy, I slow down, is thinking of the garden.
Mm-hmm.
The, his humanity is so clear in those moments. Like when I hear the story of the temptation, the 40 days in the desert, and it almost comes off like, well, he's God. He just did it. 40 days without eating, but he's okay. Like, I don't think, maybe appreciate how hard it was in his humanity to fast that long. And then when he's tempted, he rebuffs Satan. He's right on it. Bang, bang, bang. He rebuffs him right away. But the garden is a heavy scene because, like on the cross, we really see his humanity because it's spelled out.
Right.
He's a stone's throw away from anybody. So it must have been divine revelation that it was revealed to have these words written down, because there was nobody there with him to write it down or to remember it and write it down later. The scripture's clear. He was a stone's throw away. So imagine throwing a stone as hard as you can. He's that far away, and it's an olive tree grove. So there's trees in between. And he has this moment where we don't know exactly what he's seeing. Some traditions say he was seeing the weight of the sin that he would have to pay for, and how much it would take to atone for that sin from his human perspective. Some people say that it was the demons being present, like he saw holy angels and they ministered to him in the garden after he suffered and made his choice to say yes to the Father. Some tradition would say, well, he may have seen the enemy and that they would participate in going after him and inspiring the torture and punishment that he would undergo. There's different ideas behind it, but it's such an intense moment when, he's weeping and sweating and shaking to the point that he sweats blood. And by the way, that's a real thing. If you're under enough emotional stress, physiologically, the capillaries in your skin from the blood pressure, from being under enough emotional agitation and stress can break. Mm-hmm. And you'll get a tiny bit of blood mixed in with your sweat. So that's a real thing. Mm-hmm. So he's as basically upset as a person can get. And he asks the Father, can this cup be taken away? Can you find another way to do this? And Deb, that's such an amazing moment, because he's God, he's fully divine, he's fully human, and we've seen him so strongly and stoically and clearly marching towards what needs to be done. And presumably he's known the nature of it. He's known, we know for sure that he's going to die, because he's told his followers that. But how bad it's going to be, he's probably known how bad it's going to be. We mentioned yesterday, they've been crucifying people for 400 years. Everybody's seen crucifixion. Everybody knows how terrible it is, and the Romans had perfected it. But in this evening, there's something about it where he actually asks, if it's possible, let this cup pass away. Can you find another way to do it?
That was such the human side of him. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And we were talking yesterday about how we can kind of identify or see ourselves in Jesus and his choice to not sin and follow the Father, and in Judas, his choice to sin and isolate. We can see ourselves in those. We make those choices all the time. But here's a moment also where we can see ourselves. When God, through his providence in life, puts something difficult in front of us that's really hard, a big sacrifice, a huge task, maybe it's going to take years, maybe it's going to mean you're not going to do that big thing you wanted to do in your life, and you're going to give that up. Maybe it means hardship. You're going to maybe, pay for somebody to go to college, and you're never going to buy that boat, or you're never going to buy the bigger house, or whatever it might be. God gives us these challenges sometimes to do the right thing when the right thing is going to cost us dearly. And so in a sense, it's an encouragement to us that in those moments, it's okay to ask the Father, if there's another way, could you do it another way?
Right.
But the place that we need to land at the end of that, though, is to trust him and to say, well, okay,
to do his will. Yeah.
To do his will and trust him.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it's difficult, I trust that in the end, it's going to be the best thing for me and for everybody else.
Right. And God provides the grace. So he will provide the grace to get through anything.
Right.
Yeah. So have you've been to the Holy Land, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you remember the Garden of Gethsemane, and you remember how you were talking about the trees, those trees so wide. And I mean, just even walking up to them, you knew that they were 2,000 years old. And one of those trees was possibly, or some of them were even the ones that the apostles were leaning up against, and Jesus was praying next to, and you could feel it. And there's iron, like a barricade around the trees that you're not supposed to touch. You're not really supposed to touch or take parts of the tree. And I have to tell you, I'll be full disclosure. I reached through the barricade to touch the tree. I just wanted to touch it. I didn't want to take anything off of it. I just wanted to touch it. There was the strangest feeling. Could you feel it in the garden, Adam? I felt it. We talked yesterday about it having an eerie feel to yesterday, Spy Wednesday. But the
Yeah.
Garden of Gethsemane has that same eerie feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I was there, there was the leaves of the olive trees were all over the ground everywhere,
Oh, okay.
that had been
Hmm.
shed. And so a lot of people picked up leaves to take them home. I
Nice.
had the wonderful experience, Deb. We had mass in the garden,
Wow. Okay.
and the pilgrimage I was on, we had mass basically at every place we stopped. We had a mass,
Mhm.
and I don't know how to talk about it to where it'll like kind of make sense, but um, Father had like, I don't know, it was like he put an altar cloth on kind of a stone bench. There
Mm,
was no altar.
right.
We literally were just in the garden, and there was no chairs, there was no kneelers, and the ground is rocky and covered with pebbles.
Yeah.
And I remember kneeling on the pebbles and the stones and how much it hurt.
Mm,
And I remember thinking like, you'll be all right. Yeah, it hurts a lot to kneel on these things, but I was, imagining what it was like for him.
mm,
He
yeah.
was
Wow.
probably kneeling and leaning on something. I mean, if he's to the point that he's sweating blood, he's collapsed.
Right.
He was feeling that same ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course I was fine, but it was really powerful in the parts of the mass when you're kneeling
Hmm.
to be kneeling in the garden. I
Yeah.
just in and here's the thing. In the end, even though it was suffering, it was a gift.
Hmm.
Like here I am years later, and I'm still inspired by the fact that I got to go through that.
Right. Right. There is the tradition of visiting churches on Holy Thursday. It's something that I learned as a small child. I've shared this every single year on Catholic radio, any chance I get, because I have it has stayed with me since I was small. In fact, I have had or and have heard of so many mystical encounters of people taking this pilgrimage on Holy Thursday. Now, the
Mm,
tradition has it where it could be 3 churches, 7 churches, 12 churches, or anything in between. But if you settle on 7, it represents the places Jesus visited after the Last Supper until his crucifixion, and there's scripture
mm,
verses that relate to each place that Jesus walked. And the idea is that you go to Mass of the Last Supper, and then you travel to 6 other churches, and you stay with Jesus, whereas as you in prayer and in adoration, okay, all the way until 11:30 or midnight when they remove the sacrament. And so it is so amazing to make this pilgrimage. If you have churches that you can get to before midnight, the each church does it a little differently. How they set up this area for adoration. Some do it with candle lights. Have it be candlelit. They have the Knights of Columbus sometimes standing guard. All sorts of things, and so there's various ways to adorn how to do this adoration. But the idea is that you're staying with Jesus. You're willing to make that effort to stay with him and not abandon him like so many did, and you're willing to go with him right to the end.
mm.
um, this tradition is, and if we can put it in the show notes, I'll go ahead and send some articles over to senior producer Tim, so that folks can maybe grab a bunch of people and go tonight, after the mass. But the idea behind it, Adam, is simply this: that you're staying with Jesus, you're willing to make the effort, and
Mm.
you're willing to be together. Everybody to be together. So it's not just you. It's not just you alone with Jesus. You're going to be with other people doing the same thing, that are wanting to stay with Jesus. And there's a sense of comfort and strength in that.
Yeah, and it goes back to what we talked about on Spy Wednesday, that choice to continue to walk with Jesus or to isolate and separate the way Judas did. So I think that's a beautiful tradition,
Mm-hmm.
the because of course after the garden, the scene of, the crisis he went through in the garden, and then of course the arrest comes. And that's really where it turns. Like as soon as he says yes to the Father, like the next scene is he's arrested.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have all the details about what went on that night. We have tradition. We have some saints that have had, mystical awareness of it. But, we think of the Passion as kind of the stations of the cross, beginning with Pilate, condemning him to being crucified. But the suffering, the passion, the separation, the loneliness, it started in the garden.
Mm-hmm.
It started at the moment of the arrest. Some of his friends were nearby in the garden, the others were outside the gates of the garden. And when the arrest happens, he's separated from them, he's separated from his mother. He's probably beaten. He's imprisoned for the night. We don't know whether he was forced to walk, whether he was shackled, whether he was just left in a room. We don't know for sure. And you've been in the Holy Land, I've been in the Holy Land. The place that we think is the cell he was in is still there. It's an underground stone room. And so being in there, that was another one of those kind of very moving, eerie moments.
Mm-hmm.
We went there in the evening because there's a hole in the ceiling, so you can see the sky, fairly large. So if it's daytime, there'd be a lot of sunlight, coming in. We were there at night, and they turn the lights off once everybody's in the room. And it was a powerful thing. So really, the suffering of the Passion starts right after Garden. It starts here, the Last Supper, the Garden, and then the Passion really starts.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you're talking about staying with Jesus is really true, because in a sense, like, we can think of it as staying with him, comforting him, attending to him while he's going through this, because he did it alone. And spiritually, of course, the event's done. He did it 2,000 years ago. But for ourselves in our relationship with Jesus,
mm-hmm.
we can imagine ourselves either with him or near him, or remember that he's aware of us.
Mm-hmm.
You can picture him praying for you specifically, thinking of the souls that he wishes to save, to call to himself.
Right.
You can make it very personal, is what I'm saying.
Well, and also too, when you, just to keep in mind, when you go to other churches and you see how they've set it up, they set it up typically outside of the main church, typically. And it's not the type of adoration where it's exposition of the Blessed Sacrament. It's the altar of repose, where the Blessed Sacrament is on a table. It's covered usually. That's why there'll be candles around it. That's why sometimes the Knights of Columbus or lay leaders of the church are monitoring to make sure nothing harms Jesus. So it's very different from the regular standard way we have adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. So it's a different feeling, okay, which allows you to be in that Garden of Gethsemane and walk with Jesus and stay with Jesus and stay awake and stay with him and show your loyalty and show your commitment to our Lord. So it's a much different feel than typical adoration.
Yeah. Yeah. And these 3 days, these are important days. They're a different feel than any other day in the year.
And they should be. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the culmination of the liturgical year. And now we're entering into it, with the Mass of the Last Supper. We've now entered into it. The roller coaster is coming over the top of the hill, and it's about to go down and speed up. And, it's not a time to shrug and say, well, I'll go to Mass on Sunday. It's a time to engage with that, and at least in your meditations on this, in your reading, in your reflecting, watch a YouTube video from a good priest talking about it. Do something. Enter into the story and do it each day of the Triduum.
So I've been doing the 7 churches with my group of students from religious education since the late 80s. And some of them still attend. This year we have 35 going tonight. So it's pretty incredible. We have a caravan going. It's amazing. We even have a couple priests. They get on their motorcycles and they follow us along. So it's pretty cool.
Thank you for listening to The Next Right Thing with angel specialist Debbie Georgiani and religious demonologist Adam Bly. Debbie and Adam are daily contributors to the live radio program Morning Joy, hosted by Keith Downey every weekday on the Guadalupe Radio Network. For more authentic Catholic content, go to grnonline.com/joy.